Hello and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela and Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
This is our podcast about sailing the East Coast of the United States. In some episodes, we'll focus on passages and destinations. In other episodes, we talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And when we come across an interesting person, we'll try to get them as a guest on the show. Mike, great to be here together again. And today's a special episode, isn't it?
Yeah, Bela, great to see you too. And happy 100th. Not your age, okay? Nobody should get too alarmed here. But this is our 100th episode of the podcast. Pretty cool. What do you think? How are we going to celebrate?
Well, that's a good question. You and I have kind of kicked this around. What should we do for the 100th episode? And so I think where we've ended up is we're going to reflect back a little bit on some of the things that we've talked about and maybe try to look a little bit into the crystal ball and into the future to see what some future episodes may hold. But, you know, I've enjoyed all of this. Our first episode got released on November 4th in 2020. So that was a little while ago. And we've pretty much been doing episodes every other week. That's sort of been our schedule. And it's really been enjoyable. And it's been enjoyable to do them with you. I sort of remember our conversation when I said, hey, Mike, why don't we start a sailing podcast? And you said, well, I know nothing about sailing. And I said, that's exactly what makes it perfect.
Yeah, and you were right. I mean, I've learned a lot, and hopefully having this outside perspective has made the conversations a little more interesting. I don't know. It seems like the number of listeners has been going up. So, you know, we're doing something right, I guess. But I like this idea of both reflecting backwards and looking forward a little bit. It's always a nice kind of, I think, thing to do is to take a little bit of, get a little perspective, but also plan ahead. So maybe I'll start. One of the points that's really impacted my thinking and my learning about sailing during the last 100 episodes is all the different ways that people sail. Like I had this kind of unitary idea, I think, when I started this, that people just jump in a sailboat and go for a sail, right? Kind of makes sense. You see the boats go in and out of the marina and okay, great. Somebody's on with their family going for a sail. But we've talked to such a diverse set of people. Like, yeah, in my mental model of casual weekend sailors, right? Jumping out for a few hours or a day, right? Yeah, we've talked to plenty of them. Then there's these people making these long distance trips. And that's kind of a whole new world. I kind of knew they existed, but just thinking through the process of going through all that from the planning to the preparation to the actual trip itself and what happens and how you feel afterward, that's been really cool. We've talked to a few sailboat racers, and that's kind of a world I didn't know anything about. Kind of knew it existed from America's Cup, but didn't really realize that there was every week, right? Every day, every Thursday and Friday at a marina, right? Somewhere near you, right? There's races. So that was kind of cool. And then the liveaboards. I mean, again, I kind of knew there were people that lived in these houseboats, but I didn't really realize that there were people who just live in their sailboats all the time and then take it out for a sail when they want to go somewhere. So I was really been surprised by the wide variety of, maybe we can call them use cases. I don't know. Has that been surprising to you at all? Or what are your thoughts, Bela?
Well, the way you said that helps me think about why there's so many different designs of boats. There's just this huge spectrum of various different configurations, designs, and thin keels and full keels and tall mast and short mast and two masts. and I'm always puzzled, why is it like that? I mean, you look at cars, if you look at automobiles, there's basically the four-door sedan. And if you look at each manufacturer's four-door sedan, they all pretty much look the same. Right? The 2023 version of everyone's four-door sedan is pretty much the same. And the same thing with everyone's version of the SUV. It's pretty much looks the same as, you know, and from 100 feet, it'd be hard to tell the difference between brand A and brand B. But in sailboats, it's all over the map. And I think it's because of the various different use cases. It's the way people use their boats. So that the designers who design these things say, okay, I'm going to design this for a liveaboard, which means there's a way you want to do certain things because that's important to the person who's living aboard. Whereas a racer, they have different parameters. So I think that's the one clarity that really through this podcast has sort of helped me understand why it is that way. So I think that's been, for at least to me, it's been a great result of talking to all these different people and then thinking about sailing sort of in a little different way.
Neat. What else has kind of been the things that you've really noticed along the way so far? What's been the patterns that you've seen?
Yeah. So, I looked back over our 99 previous episodes, and we've had this interesting kind of collection of topics, right? We've talked a bunch about different destinations, from places like Wickford, Rhode Island, which is right on Narragansett Bay, where I keep my boat, Marion, Massachusetts, Shelburne, Nova Scotia, Cape May in New Jersey, Sandy Hook in the northern part of New Jersey, the Azores in Spain, crossing the Atlantic, crossing the English Channel and the Bay of Biscay. So we've had guests on who've talked about all of these different things. So it's given people sort of insight, again, as how different people use their boats, the different type of boats that exist, and the different types of adventures that you can have on a boat. And then we had a couple of episodes about sort of the boat buying experience and what's that sort of about, right? So people want to buy a boat. So how do you do that? What are the things to look for? And again, it goes back to this kind of maybe the theme here is that how are you going to use your boat? Are you going to race it? Are you going to live on it? Are you going to cruise on it for a day trips, or are you going for week-long trips? Because that's going to influence the type of boat you want to buy. And then we interviewed a boat broker, who sort of talked about the ins and outs of buying a boat and why you should use a broker. And then I remember we did one episode, because one of the things that everyone talks about doing when you buy a boat is getting a survey. So the survey is sort of the equivalent to the home inspection before you buy a house. It's the boat inspection. A professional comes in and inspects the boat. And we did a little episode about what the surveyor missed on my boat. And it was a good, reputable surveyor, right? I'm not knocking the surveyor, but it's a complicated thing and you're going to miss some things. So I thought that was pretty cool. The other things we've talked about is sort of the various, not only different types of boats, but also the various different ways that you can get access to sailing. So you can buy a boat, but that's not the only way to do it. You can charter a boat, which is fundamentally renting a boat for a day, a week, or 2 weeks. Or you can sail on other people's boats. You can go down to the local yacht club or marina, and chances are either on Wednesday night or Thursday night, they're going to have some races, and somebody there will be looking for crew. And you don't have to have much skill. They'll take you on and they'll show you stuff and teach you stuff. And it's a great way to get out and kind of get into the community and get to sail on other people's boats. So those are just a couple of the things that I reflected back that we've talked about on the various different episodes. And all of those, there was a little nugget or two in there, I think, for everyone. And certainly for me, there was a couple nuggets in each one. It's, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that before. What about you, Mike?
Sure. And you look at what our goals were when we started, and we were originally really just talking about destinations, remember? But then we kind of, as we unpacked this, there was so much more with kind of the seasonal maintenance cycles and all these other kind of issues that we talked about. I think to me, it's been fascinating. The second big point that I really enjoyed, and this is, again, with my limited sailing experience, remembering back to my first sailing trip in, I must have been 1983 or 1984, the evolution of technology in sailing, from paper charts to electronic equipment on board that you had in your cockpit, and now the apps that everybody has on their phone for the most part. It's really changed, and I think it's changing more rapidly now in the last few years than it was in the decades before. But what struck you about the range of technologies that sailors have access today, kind of versus, a few years ago versus when you started sailing?
I have often reflected back over the last couple of years with this boat when I'm out sailing around, and I ask myself, how would I have done this if I didn't have GPS? And many times the answer is I wouldn't have done it. Mm-hmm. Right? So that has a good side and a bad side. Sometimes this technology gives you a little bit more confidence, or makes you more, you're willing to take more risk because of the technology, because you think the technology is going to protect you. So you have to be a little bit careful about that and tuned into that a little bit. I have come in to a harbor, I would say at dusk. I won't say in the dark. I came into my home harbor once in the dark, and it was nerve-wracking. And this is recently, right? It's with the new boat with GPS. And I've come into new harbors at dusk and with GPS. And there's no way I would have done that 20 years ago with paper charts. I mean, unless it was like an emergency and I just had to do it. There's just no way I would do that. So I think it's game changing. The GPS has just been game changing. And, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it was, $4,000 to get it on your boat. Now it's on your freaking phone. And there's an app that you can pay $30 a year for, and you have the marine charts and you have GPS. It's phenomenal. The other great invention recently has been this AIS, which is I think it stands for Automatic Identification System. And it's basically my boat transmits a signal out that transmits its location, its GPS location, its direction, and its speed, and the name of the boat. And other boats have that, and so other boats can receive that information, and other boats transmit their information, and I can see that, so I can tell which direction boats are and boats around me. Now, not everyone has it, but that's also very, very helpful, particularly with commercial vessels when you're in Narragansett Bay does have a shipping channel on it, and the Port of Providence pretty busy. So every day there's 2 or 3 big freighters or barges that come up the bay in one direction or the other. And there's a big carport further south on the bay. So we get a fair amount of big ships, and it's, that's really nice to have. I think the other thing is interesting is the weather apps. So there's all these various different weather apps that you can get. And I often have to remind myself, it's still just a prediction, right? It's not,
for sure.
Right. It's a model. It's a mathematical model. And people will argue about the various different models and which ones are better and which ones are worse and blah, 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 blah. But it's still a model. And it astonishes me how often these weather apps will say, okay, this afternoon, the wind will be 5 to 10 knots and from the west. And I'll go out, and lo and behold, it's 20 knots. It's still from the west, but it's 20 knots. It's not 5 to 10. And the difference between 10 knots and 20 knots on a boat is huge. It's the difference between, for many people, from comfort to getting very nervous.
Yep.
So
that's a big error, right? When we're talking about, it's a 50% error or more, right? Then that's a lot of error when you're planning something. And it's just, it's a natural system that defies total prediction. Our predictions have gotten better and better, but they're far from perfect. It's fascinating.
And I think because we have all this information on our phones or our electronic devices, and the GPS is super accurate. The AIS is super accurate. All the other things we do is super accurate. Weather is one of the few things that we have on our phones that's a prediction of the future. And I think we often in our own minds give it too much value. We say, oh, that's what's going to happen. Well, lo and behold, it may not happen. It may be different.
And then you're not prepared. And as we've talked to several people, right, when you're not prepared is when something bad happens,
Right.
So it's not understanding the error rates that go with weather prediction. The app is nice and glossy. It looks really convincing, right? But it's really based on a model of a natural system that is inherently unpredictable.
Right.
Interesting.
What other takeaways you got, Mike?
I think another kind of, maybe the third and final one that I'll share is the nature of the sailing community being friendly and helpful and kind. And as we've gone through and we've heard more and more stories of people being helpful and caring and kind, these stories have kind of stacked on top of each other so that it's a really consistent, almost without exception kind of set of stories. And at the same time, when we look at the world around us, we seem to see, and again, maybe this is perception, right? But we seem to see less and less of these kind of behaviors in the rest of the world. So I think, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but to me, what drives this? Why is this community more caring and helpful than the general community, if my assumption is correct? And is there a way that we can bottle this and get the rest of society to think this way again? I don't know. Thoughts on that, Bela? Am I out of my mind or something to it?
You may be out of your mind, but that's a whole
Mhm.
nother issue. But your observation, I think, is 100% correct. And we've talked about this several times in various different episodes, how there is this just great community around boaters that's willing to help each other. And I'm not just saying help each other when, you fall overboard, someone will come pick you up. Yes. I mean, there's actually an obligation to do that.
Mhm.
But to help each other sort of in other nicer ways, or less life-threatening ways, from helping you fix something on your boat, sharing some knowledge, and I think it has to do with this sense of community and connection. So there's this common thing that we all do. We love our boats. We love going out on the water, and it brings people together from all various different walks of life. And it really don't care. People don't seem to care whether you're a Fortune 500 CEO of a company and you make millions of dollars a year, or whether you're a young couple who basically sold everything they had and bought a boat for $10,000 and are fixing it up and plan to live on it.
And we've had
We're all
that range on the show. We really have. We've
Yeah,
had that exact range on the show in the 100 episodes. But
yeah,
this generosity, maybe generosity is the right word. This generosity
yeah.
of time and insight, right, has been consistent throughout regardless of who we've talked to.
Yeah, generosity is a good word for that. And I wonder, at least we've all seen movies about the small little town in Kansas where there's a couple hundred people who live there. They all know each other, and you get, at least from the movies, you get that same sense of generosity. Um, and maybe that's a fallacy, maybe it's not, but it's certainly, I agree with you. It's certainly something, particularly in this country and maybe around the world as well, that we have seemed to get much more divisive. We've seemed to get much more polarized, and it reminds me of sort of the way sports talk radio is or was, right? If you were sports talk radio in Boston, if you didn't root for one of the Boston teams, you were the enemy, right? And we
Mhm.
sort of polarized our media and many other things sort of the same way that sports talk radio was always sort of very polarized. And you just don't see that maybe there's a little bit of, well, there's a motorboater and that's a sailor, right? So there's a little bit of that sort of pushing back and forth. But man, if you're in the marina and someone needs help or you're I can't, it's amazing how many times I've been, in the cockpit of my boat with parts on the table out there, and I'm scratching my head trying to figure out where these things go or something, and someone will walk by and say, hey, you need a hand. It's just remarkable, because those things don't happen in normal parts of life. So
Right. And they
if
don't
there
say,
is
oh, you're on a catamaran and I only like people that have single hold boats.
right,
Right.
right, not an issue, so I agree with you 100%. If there's some way to bottle this and get this to propagate through the rest of society, it'd be a much better place on the earth.
And people who are sailors capture this in your heart and then figure out a way to take it in the rest of your life too. I mean, this is another thing, that boaters can be the group that kind of spread this mentality, leading through example. I don't know. Interesting thought. What about looking forward, Bela? Like, to me, it might be interesting for our listeners to explore, at least it's in my face here in Germany a lot, is both the near term and the potential long-term impacts of climate change on sailing in the East Coast of the US. It seems like being on the water and being on the ocean is one place where we're really seeing and feeling a lot of impacts early on of climate change. I don't know. Do you think this is something that we should be really thinking about in more detail and talking about in the next 100 episodes?
Well, that's a good question. Clearly, I haven't been sailing long enough to be able to say that, the X, Y, and Z is different this year than it was 30 years ago. And part of the challenge for me is that the seasonal changes are much more drastic than the changes from the summer of 2000 to the summer of 2023. Right. In other words, because we go through these 4 seasons here, right? And it's drastic changes, but clearly stuff is changing. I mean, we know climate changes here. I'm not trying to say it's not. It's clearly here. Earth's getting warmer. The Earth has never been in steady state. So the notion is the climate's changing. So the question is, what can we do to help slow it down or to minimize
respond to it? Like hurricanes and tropical storms have been going up, right? Then both the number and the severity, at least the data that I've looked at. How do how do sailors deal with that? Right.
Right. What can we do? What can we do that minimizes the impact on Earth? I would just say on Earth. It's not just about climate. To me, it's about our impact on
from
on
emissions to plastic, single-use plastic usage
everything.
to the materials used on the boat. Yeah.
And I'll tell you one thing, being out on the water really tunes you into the weather. I mean, you are very aware of how windy it is, how big the waves are. Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? Right. When I'm in my house, I'm sort of insulated from all that kind of stuff. But man, when I'm on the water, I am focused and tuned into that. So it's really important. And so I think the big question is, how can we minimize our impact on the Earth? Now, the other point I want to make is sailors are really tuned into energy consumption, because I think the whole thing going on is about fossil fuels. And so sailors are really tuned into that. It's top of mind, not just energy consumption, but resource management, managing your water, managing your electricity, right? All those types of things, because you're off the grid and you're sort of your own little village from that perspective. You have a water system, you have a sewer system, you have a power generation system. So it's top of mind. And it's interesting. I was thinking about this the other day, how 10, 15 years ago, the way that most people generated electricity on a boat was either a generator, so a diesel-fired generator, or a wind generator. So they would have a little wind turbine, maybe 2 feet in diameter, on their boat, and it would generate electricity. And now I would say it's probably 90% of people who live on their boat and our cruisers, it's solar. Solar has taken over. It is the predominant way that people generate electricity. And so that's sort of interesting, right? It's gone from generators to wind power to solar. And it's often made me think, is that a predictor of what's going to happen in the rest of the world in the future, right? Is really solar, and as solar technology and solar cells improve, is that going to be the way? And then, of course, the challenge is storing that electricity. And that's gotten much better, continues to get better. It's still not super great. And I think you now see more and more people starting to think about, and even manufacturers coming out as an option in buying a new boat, electric drives, which I think is pretty cool.
For sure.
Right? Just like there's electric cars, right? People are, and particularly in a sailboat, it makes a lot of sense, because you can do it. You don't need to go fast. You don't need a ton of power like in a motorboat or a power boat or a trawler or something. But yeah, you can see that starting to happen. So I think solar's increasing in its usage. Wind is decreasing. Diesel generators are decreasing. And I think you're going to see more and more electric drives come out on I think particularly sailboats and other boats where, again, the range is you're not trying to go nonstop from Florida to Nova Scotia on a power boat. So anyway, I think a good question, Mike. And I think we should see if we can get some folks on who can maybe talk about some of the technology trends going on in its move away from fossil fuels in sort of the marine industry.
Yeah, I mean, sailing is definitely one of the most sustainable options, I think, in transportation of getting you from point A to point B. And can we go the last mile and make that diesel outboard or the diesel inboard engine that's sitting on the back and the fuel tank going away as well, or used less and less. So yeah, I think that's a cool thing looking forward. And yeah, really interested to hear more from people who are using their sailboats in different ways and exploring different parts of the world and going on these challenges. We've talked to so many people that have really created life challenges for themselves that they wanted to accomplish with their families or with their friends, and kind of transform their lives. So I really hope we do more of these stories of how sailing really transforms people's lives and makes their lives more meaningful and valuable, because I think we've just seen time after time great example of this, and that's been one of these current themes that I hope we keep continuing. So lots to look forward to, and lots to be thankful for as we look back on 100 episodes. Bela, what do you think? Time to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think so. Let's wrap this one up, Mike.
Sure. Well, thanks for joining us for the 100th time, and we hope you found our conversation interesting and thought-provoking as usual. If you have questions about what we've discussed, feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, all one word, @gmail.com.
Hey, and again, thank you for all of our listeners for bearing through 100 episodes and making this a successful podcast for us, and certainly very enjoyable for Mike and I. We've got to talk to a bunch of interesting people, and we've got to talk about a bunch of interesting topics. So I hope you guys continue to enjoy the show as we do as well. So if you know of someone who might be a good guest on the show, or you know someone who might maybe can talk a little bit about some of the trends in boating and sailing, like electric drives, energy storage, etc., pass those names our way. We'd love to have a chat with them and get them as a guest on the show. Mike, there's about an inch of snow out here outside my window in chilly upstate New York. I've been skiing, so that has started, and I'm starting to think about sailing because as soon as I start skiing, I start thinking about sailing. So hopefully in a few more months, it'll warm up and I can get the boat uncovered and back in the water. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you all soon.
Sounds great, Bela. And from over here in Münster, Germany, we'll see you next time.